alaikum. Good afternoon. I'm honored and delighted to be here on my first visit to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And I have been learning already some of the exciting things that you are developing in education. It's been a real pleasure to meet people here at the conference and hear some of the things that you are working on. And I hope that what I will say today will give you encouragement and also offer you some challenges. I am here on behalf of the Center for Curriculum Redesign, which is based in Harvard in Boston in the USA, and is a center that has been a center for research and for development across the world. And you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go through. I'm actually from the UK, and I think you heard that I used to be Director of Curriculum for England, and I was responsible for writing and rewriting the national curriculum for England. I want you to see how thick the books are that I was responsible for, and these are the specifications for all subjects in the English national curriculum. They changed about every 5 years that we used to do a revision, but this one was noticeable because for the first time we tried to integrate skills into the curriculum. So they are explicitly spoken about in this curriculum that I was working on. I was also responsible for the development of assessment and testing at different stages in education, and we had to think about how you change the assessments in order to make sure that they are part of what is included in the assessment so that the curriculum was really going to be put into place. And then I continued in those development of those strategies, as you heard, in Oman and Rwanda. What I want to talk about today is about the future and what should students learn and what should we do about assessment. This is a rather wide topic, so I'm going to be looking at this from a more general point of view, but I want to ask you to consider the challenges for education from the fundamental changes in our world. We need our young people growing up to understand essential knowledge, not just Google it, and also to have the skills, attitudes, and character to use that knowledge in the world of 2030 and beyond. The challenges are at many different levels. Global warming, or financial instability, at national levels with income inequities, and personal privacy. They all interact, but they're all global questions. Many of these global problems are human-made. What happens is that technology makes them even more disrupted, even more difficult to cope with. So technology exaggerates some of these problems, but can also solve some of them. Technology can be positive, as we know. If it isn't, then it's a failure of our ethics and values, our leadership, and our thinking. And if that's not what education is about, then it means we have to think very hard about our education. And what I want you to do to think about today is the detail, but within the wider picture. So, VUCA used to be what people talked about. They were called futurists. And what they included in VUCA was the fact that the world was becoming volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I don't think it's the future, I think it's now. And so what we are having to work on is this kind of world now. So the question is, what will our children and us need to be successful in that world? Education is perhaps the most powerful way we can support our young people. They come to school a lot, they're there for quite a long time, and it makes such a difference to their life chances and what they can do. Now, education has many purposes, and they all relate to what should be taught and how for the rest of this century. So let's look at how far around the world those outside education think education systems are succeeding. This is a graph from a survey of European countries. And you'll see that the smallest part of the bar is employers' views of how far education is succeeding. Only about a third of employers think that education is succeeding in preparing young people for the world after school. If you ask the young people in the middle line, not many more of them think that it's been a success. If you ask the education providers, twice as many think that what they're providing is suitable for the world beyond school. So there's a question there. Those of us in education, are we really doing the job that helps? When 3/4 of education think it's good, but a third of employers are not convinced. So let's think about what the employers thought young people needed. And these are familiar to you. We have talked about them all day yesterday, all day today, I'm sure, and tomorrow. So these skills are what employers around the world generally agree are the essential skills for life, for problem solving, for contributing to society, and for personal success and well-being. Currently, around the world, just before I said, the picture now is of the book that outlines the 21st century skills that the Curriculum for Centre Redesign has published a little while ago now. And they have been working with something around 77 countries across the world who they know are moving to include skills as they have them in that book. So you are part of a worldwide and global movement to include those skills. The employers they pose the skills like this. The biggest question was communication, then creativity, and then critical thinking and problem solving. So that's how employers have prioritized the skills. So education systems are catching up with employers by thinking about what they're providing in the classroom. But beyond knowledge and skills, and this is where I begin to ask you to think, our young people need to be strong in their character and attitudes. employers are telling us that the workplace needs some character qualities as well as some skills. And they all agree that probably that also needs to develop through education systems. So, what are these character qualities that they want? And these are very high in importance according to employers. Ethics. That means things like our values, fairness, honesty, respectfulness, unselfishness. Those sorts of things are things that employers want to see in the people we send to them. So how in schools and higher education, in universities, do we encourage that kind of set of expectations? Leadership, people who are able to take responsibility, to make decisions, and take others with them. Obviously, some of the skills that we talked about will be important for leadership, but the quality is a character quality of leadership. And then resilience and curiosity, open to change, welcome change, and learn more about it, and then encourage a positive attitude to the challenges that brings. And mindfulness, empathy, calmness, generosity. So these qualities are identified as qualities of character that employers want to see. Different countries value them differently. This is an order that changes from different places, but all are needed. And the employers want to see reform of education, which, first of all, they nominate curriculum reform, and they want that curriculum reform to link to the world of work, including cooperation with employers, working with employers to include things that they want to see. They also, halfway across, want improvements in evaluation and assessment. So this is the challenge that employers are putting to us. And one of the reasons for this is the change in profile of jobs. Goldman Sachs, well-known trading company on the stock market, not so very long ago, it was all right to be a historian or have a history degree to be a trader. 600, something like that, had social studies degrees. But now, they're down to 2. And it's the computer scientists that have taken over the trading floors. So we need to think about IT. The hedge fund billionaire, Dalio, says we're headed for a world where you're either going to be able to write algorithms and speak that language or be replaced by one. Right. So the changing patterns of employment mean changes in education. New jobs are appearing. I think the ministers this morning were talking about this. The jobs that are most highly paid now are those top 4. You can see they're very technologically dominated, and then also the medium payment. You get more people who know about technology, but they use it for different purposes. So you can see the changes in technology. But let's not pretend everything is changing. There are some jobs that are going to survive and are going to be still important, And you can see in these lists, there are jobs like detectives, teachers, you'll be pleased to know, tour guides, surgeons, fitness instructors. There are all sorts of people. Those jobs that we kind of know now will continue and will be important. And the reason why they'll continue is because they're complicated. They require knowledge and skills and character qualities. And they can't just be replaced by an algorithm. So we need to be conscious that this sort of work will still be needed. Right? It's not going to be all IT. So, where is technology having its impact? You'll recognize these. I don't know how many of you can remember that sort of technology. I can remember even further back to when you wasn't even mobile. And of course now, there's a huge change, complete change in phone technology, which in fact has changed our lives. When I was young, the phone was linked to the floor and you had to go to the phone. Now, our phones can't leave our pockets or our bags. We have to take them with us wherever we are. And that has changed how we interact with people. I used to have to I couldn't email people or text them, so I either wrote a letter or I used that thing over there. It changes how we are, and some of you will know that only too well. But what kinds of assumptions can we make about work in the future? For example, we might have thought that we'll always need people who can speak more than one language because we will need to trade around the world with people who don't speak our language. But now there are programs where you could be speaking in Arabic and the program will translate for you into Chinese, right, or something. So it begins to think, well, I don't want to put the translators out of a job. That would be unfortunate, but you need to think we can't always assume that some jobs will always be needed. So, what is artificial intelligence doing for us? There are 3 slides here about Bloom's taxonomy, and some of the things that computers are now doing for us, which were not so before. So, in the cognitive domain, computers are well able to do a lot of these things that are on the left-hand side in the Bloom's taxonomy. So, we have Google and Facebook, and we have Translate, and we have all sorts of things that are changing our understanding of what we should know. An example would be, this is in a medical context, if there was a competition between AI and humans, actually, in the red column, computers are getting better than doctors at analyzing heart attacks, diagnosing strokes, and actually autism. So now, computers are better at that than humans are. They need to collaborate for diagnosing Alzheimer's and surgery. They need to be able to use both. There's a tie in this competition, but when it's needed both the doctor and the computer to work on brain cancer or ophthalmology or skin cancer. And there are some things that cannot be replaced. The doctors win when it comes to general diagnosis and to thinking in more complicated ways and also intuitively about what might be wrong with us and what might be needed. In the affective domain, you'll recognize some of these. Robots are becoming part of our lives. We speak to them. We expect them to do things for us. I have seen some people feeling that they're like a dog or a friend, their robot. And we know about speaking to them and controlling things at a distance, all of those sorts of things. So in the affective domain, we are learning that robots will help us in our lives. And then, of course, in the psychomotor domain, you'll recognize how much is automated these days, and that is going to continue, of course. And we make cars with hardly any people there, whereas cars used to employ all sorts of people on a long line. And what's more, you don't have to look like a human to do a human job, right? So hamburgers are made by robots very easily, and you probably wouldn't know the difference, right? So computers are beginning to be significant in those three domains. So these automations will have an impact, just as in the 1930s. I'm using this as an example from quite a long time ago. The tasks that people were being prepared for were tasks which were predictable and physical. That it was about, and where it was using data, it was processing data and collecting data. Now that those things are done by machines and computers, it's been calculated that that has removed about 50% of the total working hours that were needed in the 1930s. So think hard. I can see a shaking head here, but that's a significant effect. And of course, in England in the 1930s, they needed free soup, free help, because they were all struggling with employment, vast amount of unemployment. So with these fundamental trends in how to organize ourselves, we need an array of tools. We could only think of a Swiss Army knife to convey to you how many tools we need. But you don't only need the tools, you need to be able to use them appropriately and in the right places. So as IBM put it, they want T-shaped humans. They want humans with a breadth of knowledge, not just a narrow single discipline, but a breadth of knowledge, but also a depth of expertise, the ability to apply and use that knowledge, as used to be the case a long time ago in what was called the Renaissance. So these computers, in the Renaissance, people could be a physicist and a painter and a poet and a politician. They didn't have to just do the one thing. So it's important to remember that more people are going to have to be like that now. So education needs to be a lot more relevant if we are to look forward and work out what to teach. Now, in education, what we know is, of course, we have to think about curriculum and assessment, and we also know that what gets assessed, the score, drives the behavior. So we teach what will be assessed, and we sacrifice things that we think are important in order that young people can get the qualification they need. So what we're thinking about is changing both the curriculum and assessment, but also the education systems within which they sit. And these are some of the people that CCR, Centre for Curriculum Redesign, is working with, all sorts of places across the world, and in OECD and in high-ranking PISA jurisdictions. And I believe you also have participated in the PISA. So what we have learned from that is that although it might not look like it, countries' needs are quite similar. Here's an example you would recognize, that although they seem different, so the situation in Saudi Arabia is different from the situation in China, of course, but underneath it there are some very similar needs. All countries need lines along which electricity travels and a socket into which they can plug the necessary machine. So although the sockets all look different, and I had to think, what do I have to bring to be able to connect here in Saudi? It turned out that wasn't difficult, but it's true across the world. So if there are similar needs, what does that mean we need to do? We need to reassess knowledge for relevance and what we really need, so that we also stop teaching some things. My colleague's favorite example is trigonometry in maths. Why does anybody in school have to learn trigonometry? It doesn't have any real use for the vast majority of people. And yet mathematicians say it's absolutely essential. And I wonder why they say that. Is that because they learnt it, or they can think it might be useful sometime hereafter? But at the moment, we really need to think quite radically about what we can drop. I was in a workshop yesterday where we were discussing how to assess skills, and people in the room were saying, but we haven't got time to do this because we've got so much knowledge we need to tell them. There's too much, we don't have time. So we have to think about how do we make that time, and some of that means being quite radical with what we teach, because one of the other things we need to be able to do is introduce modern disciplines, entrepreneurship, a lot of STEM subjects, technological and engineering. We need to be able to think, okay, we need history and we need social studies, but we also need entrepreneurship, psychology, learning how people become like they are. We need anthropology, how did our societies develop, and more of the STEM subjects. So we need to think, how are we going to allow those things to grow? When I was in Rwanda, one of the most exciting lessons I saw was in entrepreneurship, where the young people had been making a business case for something they would like to do. They wanted to set up a shop, or they wanted to sell something, and they had to make the business case, they had to sort out the money, they'd had to work out how many people they wanted to employ, where they would go. They presented that to their classmates, and the classmates said, but you haven't thought about this, and what about that? It was a really lively lesson. The students demonstrated so much that they knew, but also that they could put that knowledge to use. So we need to think about how we make space for those things. We still need those skills, as we talked about before, and this begins to introduce the issues around pedagogy. Right? Not only what you teach, but how it's taught. Right? And that, again, people have the view that it takes longer if you want to introduce creativity or collaboration. We really need to test that hypothesis and think hard about whether that's what sort of learning is going on when we are encouraging them to collaborate or to communicate. And then also, I think we need to build those character qualities. You see which one is the most energetic of these frogs. We need to think about how we teach, how we behave in the classroom, and what our values are, how we teach them. The values that matter, the values of understanding others' points of views, the values of helping others, and so on. Adaptation is at a premium. We're saying that what we need to provide in education is the skills, the knowledge, the character that will enable young people to face the challenges and the changes without having had them all sorted out for them in advance. So we have to bind all these together in something which I'm calling here meta-learning. And there are two things I want to include in here. One is metacognition, that is, knowing how you learn. As a learner, how do I find it the best way to remember things, to communicate things? It's not the same for everybody. So learning and knowing how to reach the goals that I have and continuing to grow because I know how best to learn for me. And then a growth mindset is that mindset about the expectation of change, the orientation to learning and improvement, where it's okay to make mistakes because mistakes are opportunities. And so it's not about it's wrong, but rather what do I need to think about because it doesn't seem to be working. Okay? So metacognition, meta-learning. And this is how the Centre for Curriculum Redesign draws that picture. The knowledge, the skills, and the character, all encompassed by the meta-learning. I think, well, maybe it's not going to do it. This is an attempt at a picture to help you see these overlap, but they're also distinctive, and all of them add up for a young person in how I learn and how I can respond to the challenges. There we are, that's the things that I was thinking. This is explained in this book. I only have one copy and you can't have it, but you're welcome to look at it. This explains all the different things and where we get the ideas from and so on. If you look on here, you can download the book in English, and there is a 3-page it's about 5 pages, 6 pages, a summary in Arabic there. I have a few copies, but not very many. So there is the opportunity to read something in your first language. So, and I think this will go on the website, I think, will it? So this presentation. Yeah, so you can get the link then. Okay, so what is holding us back from making these changes? One is we tend to concentrate on the detail, and we should think more broadly about the ecosystem. That's where we start the development, is with the big picture rather than with the detail. We need the courage to remove the blocks. Think about what are we going to drop. Work out where the difficulties are. What's the way to the broader vision? We need to move faster. Typewriters are a thing that I remember. I'm not sure you will. And things like university entrance requirements may need revising in order that we can move faster. And what that means is assessment. Both what we assess and how it's done is scarcely keeping up with our ambitions for the curriculum. I think many of the contributors to this conference are thinking about this, and we all know this particular adage: what gets measured gets managed. This was spoken by a mathematician 150 years ago. Right? So things have still got universal truths even now. The Centre for Curriculum Redesign is developing an assessment research consortium, and they've been thinking about assessment, particularly focusing on assessing skills and character, utilising meta-learning. Around the globe, that the science of assessments is lagging, right? We don't have an agreement across the globe about how it all fits together. So then we don't quite know what we are assessing. And there's fragmentation, so we don't have agreement among researchers or among teachers about how we tackle this complexity. And there's an assessment gap. There are initiatives, but assessment is not keeping up. And we have to close that gap somehow. So, I've nearly done. The mission of the Assessment Research Consortium is to catalyse the developments of systems of knowledge for assessment for knowledge, skills and character by rapidly advancing and disseminating research, development and practice. And we are already working with people like this, producing books like this, and here are 2 reports. Again, there's the links if you want them. And we would be really glad if people here wanted to join us and get onto the website and make contact. So, I have just 2 or 3 more things to say about assessment. One is that we are distinguishing between assessment of learning, like in standardized tests, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. And we are looking particularly in the second 2 at the application of knowledge and skills, setting tasks which challenge the learner and so develop character traits as well. They're both formative to identify the next steps. There are, of course, many purposes for education outcomes. They now need to be matched against those 4 things that we need to work out where they fit. We know that assessments are various and very different. They can be objective, they can also be subjective. The contribution of computers may be in the digital place, including, for example, this one is where adaptive testing on a computer meant that an e-learning course which assessment of it took 45 minutes. By using adaptive testing, it shortened that by up to 50%. So it can make actually more, so that algorithm can make assessment more efficient. So, as we've said, scorecards drive behavior. Let's not have excuses. Let's take responsibility. Remember, we cannot all necessarily measure all that matters, but it's not a reason for not doing what matters. With a lot of work, we can do this. Together we'll get there. It always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Dr. Sue Harnell. Actually, Dr. Sue took us in a journey of thinking about changing our thinking of education. So thank you. نشكر الدكتورة سو على هذه المحاضرة القيمة التي تدعونا إلى التأمل والتفكير فيما نقدم وكيف نقدمه لأبنائنا للتسلح بسلاح العلم الذي يؤهلهم لأن يكونوا سلاح العلم والمهارة التي تؤهلهم لأن يجدوا لهم موضع قدم في المستقبل القريب إن شاء الله. سنستقبل يعني عدد من الأسئلة، وسنأخذ يعني سؤال من الأخوات وسؤال من الأخوان يعني بالتبادل، فأرجو أن تكون يعني الأسئلة مختصرة ومركزة. الأخوات عندهم أسئلة؟ طيب.
Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. My question, you mentioned that we can use metacognition or meta-learning to assess skills and character. For example, can you give us an example how to assess creativity using meta-learning or metacognition?
Well, I think that I'm not sure we need to assess metacognition. We need to help children understand what is creativity and how do they use it. What are the opportunities in their classrooms to use creativity, to think up something that isn't the same as everybody else, to be able to bring things together and have a new idea about something. So it's a question of giving them opportunities, not telling them what the answer is, but giving them opportunities to think about what they know and how that can be applied in a new situation for them. And then a teacher is in the position, you can either do that, you could do that in a written test. Of course, you can give them some evidence and say, tell me what you think this means, right? And you don't then assess if it's right or wrong, but how have they used the evidence? How have they reached the conclusion that they've reached? And is it a good conclusion in the way they have done it? Not just it's right or it's wrong, all right? So it's creating the opportunities for them to be able to use different thinking, new thinking.
Okay. Thank you. تفضل.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this informative presentation and the opportunity you gave us by sharing your knowledge and the information you shared with us. Thank you so much for that. I have a very quick question about future skills and assessing future skills. I have taught some IT courses like robotics, game design, game development, some IT or computer-related topics. One of the problems I found is some students, especially females, they jump from one major to another major multiple times because they could not understand or they could not find their identity in their fields or the IT fields. So my question is, how can we measure or how can we assess domain identification? How can we know if our students see themselves as, for example, computer scientists instead of individuals who know computer science? Thank you.
I think that some of that means explicit teaching. I noticed this morning the Minister talked, His Excellency talked about 67% of time on computers is spent on social media. I think that was what he said this morning. Well, maybe we need to discuss quite a lot of that and work out what the possibilities are and when it is appropriate, and this is meta-learning, when it is appropriate to use computers and when not, and how you can use it to make yourself a scientist or a social scientist. And that thinking about how to think like a scientist must now incorporate not just theories, but also applications, many of which are available through experience on a computer. And we think of simulations and all sorts of things like that, which we need, I think, to present our learners with in order that they begin to be able to integrate the computing and the experience of that with the other learning that they have. And I think we can't leave that until the end. We have to do it as we go along and as the applications develop, because somebody was telling me they didn't want to introduce skills until the end of school. And I don't think that will work. We have to do it as we go along, because otherwise they will jump to the wrong conclusions. I noticed that many of you have got your heads down, you're looking at this little screen in front of you. So there's a question about how much do you need to do that, at what times, and for what purposes, and helping our students to think very positively, not just about, oh, I'll Google that, but actually, do I believe what I'm being told? How do I make better use of what I'm being told? And how do I make friends and interact with people without spending 60-odd% of my computer time talking to them, one way or another? Does that partly answer? Okay.
Okay. تفضل.
Thank you so much for this informative presentation. I understood from the summary of the lecture on the application that we'll be talking about artificial intelligence and especially its applications like in medical field and stuff like that. I was wondering how is the application of artificial intelligence would change the assessment strategies somehow?
I think one answer is we don't quite know yet because we haven't done enough of it. But I was involved in a project to produce tests of reading and writing in part of the UK where they didn't all do the same test, and that children started doing the test together, and then the AI took them in different directions because of how they did the first bit of the testing. Right? Because that way we got more information about what they could and couldn't do and took them in different ways to help us understand how they could get on. So that is an algorithm that has been constructed to work with assessment. I'd have to say that the questions, we worked really hard to make them include skills as well as knowledge. And that is also really important. Multiple choice questions can do that, but you have to think really hard about them. And that's another way that we might be able to think about the rubrics that you write for questions and what are they really assessing, and how can we, for example, invite children to make deductions or inferences or to think critically about what they're being told rather than just tick off one of the answers. Right? So I think there are ways that we're beginning, but I don't think even around the world we've got much in the way of development. It may be you have here in EEC. I don't know.
شكرا دكتور السو. محمد بن جحلان من المدينة المنورة مدير مركز التدريب.
Who's speaking?
I speak by Arabic.
Oh.
I speak by Arabic but because my English not so good. بالنسبة للعلوم الإنسانية يقولون أنه صعب قياسها.
We cannot hear you.
يقول بالنسبة للعلوم الإنسانية صعب قياسها. هل هذه المقولة صحيحة؟ العلوم الإنسانية صعبة القياس، يعني قياسها صعب، تقييمها صعب.
human science answer is hard to measure. Is that's what is right?
We know a lot about how people behave, and we know a lot about what helps people behave differently. In our classrooms, we may not be giving them 5 out of 10 for how they behave, but if we don't think about how they're behaving and help them to behave differently, to think differently, or whatever, we are assessing them, but not in that formal sense of giving them a score for their character. But we do need to be able, if that's what we think they need to be able to do in the world beyond school, we need to recognize that in the classrooms. I agree that assessing, let's say, leadership, there may not be many opportunities in school to do that, so we need to create opportunities, and we don't want to then say, you're a bad leader, but you're a good one. We want to be able to say, what makes a leader? How can we help you all be leaders? I didn't learn at school to make a talk through a microphone to 1,000 people, right? I've had to work out how to do that by thinking about what I've learned and what I need to do in order to help you. You may think I'm not very good at it yet, and I'll take your advice later about what I need to do to improve, but I think that we have to have the opportunities and take all that we can to make judgments about how to assess the human sciences.
One more question, please. Here.
ناخذ آخر سؤال.
Turkish Sulami, King Abdulaziz University. I have a question for you. Now we're talking about. Sorry, I have a question, please. Okay, you're talking about future skills, and we're talking about students. But what about teachers who teaches in schools and universities? Don't we need to ensure that they are equipped with these skills before pass it on the students?
I'm absolutely sure you do. And I understand there is a program underway, and our colleagues, Dr. Griffin from Australia is involved in a major program which will help teachers reassess how they teach and how they can make the opportunities for these. I was delighted to hear about it because nothing will change if the teaching doesn't change, right? And what I was trying to do, knowing that that program is going on, was to say teachers naturally want children to learn well, to behave well, to develop. And what we're trying to do is move even beyond skills into what kinds of people they will be. And the way that teachers do that is really significant for our young people and their chances. Thank you.
يبدو لي أن انتهى الوقت. نشكر. We would like to thank Dr. Suharna.